Okay, so get this right. President-elect Trump, he's making some waves again, suggesting the U.S. should, well, retake control of the Panama Canal.
Yeah, it's definitely raising some eyebrows for sure.
To say the least, right. You're probably thinking, wait a minute, doesn't Panama already control that thing? And yeah, you'd be right. The U.S., we built it, early 1900s, ran it for ages, but handed it over completely back in 99.
1999.
So why is this even a topic now? Why does it matter? Well, that's exactly what we're going to try to figure out today. We've got a whole bunch of sources here, news articles, expert opinions, even some pretty interesting reactions online, and we're gonna break it all down.
It's a fascinating situation, really. I mean, it really exposes those anxieties about, the U.S.'s place in the world, especially with China becoming more and more influential.
Yeah. Okay, so first things first, let's get clear on what exactly Trump is saying. He's accusing Panama of, quote, ripping off the U.S., says the fees for using the canal are unfair. He's also brought up China, specifically a company from Hong Kong that runs ports at the canal entrances.
Right. And the language he used was, well, it was strong. I mean, he said, and this is a quote, "We will demand that the Panama Canal be returned to us in full, quickly, and without question." That's not exactly the usual diplomatic language, is it?
No, not really. No. Sounds a bit more like, well, I don't know, an ultimatum.
Yeah.
So how did Panama respond to this bold statement, we'll call it?
Well, President Mulino, Panama's leader, he basically said, nope, not going to happen. He rejected all of Trump's claims, said Panama's independence is not negotiable.
Gotta admire that. Standing firm. It's like he's saying, we earned this and we're not giving it up.
Right.
He also addressed those canal fees that Trump was, criticizing. Said they're not just, made up. They're based on a system.
Yeah, a system, not just some random number. He actually had this great line. He said, every square meter of the Panama Canal and the surrounding area belongs to Panama and will continue belonging to Panama.
Mic drop. Okay, so I bet you're wondering, if the U.S. built the canal, why'd we give it up in the first place? Well, this takes us back to the early 1900s. The U.S., we were flexing our muscles on the world stage a bit back then.
Yeah. The U.S., I mean, they were instrumental in Panama becoming independent from Colombia back then. Why? Because they wanted to build that canal.
Exactly.
And they controlled the whole canal zone for decades after. But things started to change globally, politically.
The world was changing, right. And then you have those 1977 treaties signed by Carter, setting the stage for the canal eventually going back to Panama. It wasn't just global pressure, though. There was the whole Cold War thing going on, too.
Right. The U.S. was worried about instability in the region, thought handing over the canal might ease some tensions. Plus, they were trying to improve their image in Latin America.
Yeah.
Where they were seen as, well, a bit controlling.
Okay, so back to now. Is there actually any legal way for Trump to just, take the canal back?
Not really. International law is pretty clear. Panama's in charge. To seize it, you'd probably need military force, which, let's face it, would cause a huge international uproar and probably damage the canal itself. Not exactly a win-win.
No kidding. But even beyond the legal stuff, the practical problems, this whole thing seems to be a symbol of something much bigger, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It raises some really interesting questions about where the U.S. sees itself in the world these days, especially with China's influence growing. For instance, China's invested a ton in infrastructure projects in Panama, including a major expansion of the Panama City port, which strategically is right at the canal entrance.
And that's the kind of thing that makes people in the U.S. nervous, right? This being ripped off thing. As Trump puts it, it might actually be a fear of losing that global superpower status.
It's a perspective worth considering, definitely. And that brings us to the question of how this might affect, well, you. You might be thinking, okay, the Panama Canal, interesting, but how does it impact me? Well, think about it. The Panama Canal, it's like a major artery for global trade. Lots of the products you buy, electronics, clothes, food, they probably travel through that waterway. So any problems with the canal could affect prices, even availability of goods.
Exactly. And beyond the economics of it all, this has got people talking about U.S. foreign policy. Is this a sign of a more aggressive approach? Are we going to see similar pronouncements about other, strategically important areas?
It's got people speculating, that's for sure. We've seen all sorts of reactions online. Some folks are brushing it off, typical Trump bluster. Others are really worried about what this could mean for global stability.
Some of those comments on Reddit are, I gotta say, hilarious. One person even compared it to when Trump wanted to buy Greenland. Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
And then there was that time he talked about turning Canada into, like, a U.S. state. Seems like there's a bit of a pattern here, shall we say, unconventional thinking about international relations. So we've got Trump's claims, Panama's firm response, the whole history of the canal. We've even touched on the legal and practical hurdles of a potential, takeover. But now we're going to get into the really interesting stuff. This is where it gets fascinating.
What's really interesting is this whole thing seems to tap into this deeper anxiety about, global power dynamics
Yeah.
shifting. The U.S. may be feeling threatened by China rising.
And what does all this mean for other countries? How will they respond to this potential shift in U.S. foreign policy? Well, those are exactly the questions we're going to be exploring next.
This whole Panama Canal thing, it might seem far away, but it really shows you a much bigger story that's playing out. On the world stage, I mean. It's about, power, influence, how countries deal with a world that's changing so fast.
Right, exactly. It's like this whole thing, it's like a spotlight on all those anxieties people are feeling about, about global power shifting.
Yeah, think about it. The U.S. has been the big guy, the dominant player for so long, and now you've got China emerging as a major force, economic, political, the whole thing. And for some, that's pretty unsettling.
It's like that fear of being ripped off. Like Trump said, it's maybe covering up a bigger fear, the fear of losing that top dog spot.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that kind of fear, it can lead to, unpredictable actions
Yeah.
on the world stage, I mean, which is why this whole thing has so many people nervous. In the U.S., internationally, everyone.
Okay, so let's talk about those online reactions we mentioned before. Some people, they're just joking about it, like, oh, there's Trump again, saying crazy stuff to get attention. But others, they're really worried about the consequences. What could actually happen?
Yeah, there was this one Reddit comment I saw. It said, is this like a preview? Are we going to see a more aggressive, unpredictable U.S. foreign policy with Trump in charge? And that's a question a lot of folks are asking. This isn't just about the Panama Canal anymore, right? It's about what this whole thing tells us about how Trump sees the world and how he might handle, international relations on a bigger scale.
And it's not just hypothetical, right? I mean, we have actual examples from Trump's past, like
What?
when he was interested in buying Greenland, remember?
Oh, yeah. That was interesting.
And then there was that time he talked about making Canada part of the U.S., like
Yeah.
absorbing it. It's like he was just casually talking about territorial expansion, which is, I mean, you just don't hear that these days. In modern international relations, these aren't just random comments, right? They show you a mindset, one that sees territorial control as a tool of foreign policy. And that's a big change from how most countries do things now.
Exactly.
So we're seeing this potential shift in U.S. foreign policy, and it's happening at the same time as you have these rising global powers like China, who are, they're challenging the old assumptions about, who's in charge of the world stage.
Yeah, exactly. We're seeing this redistribution
Yeah.
of economic and political influence.
Yeah.
And it's causing a lot of, uncertainty
Yeah.
and tension. And this Panama Canal thing is just one symptom of all these bigger changes happening globally, I mean.
It's like we're at a crossroads, and this whole incident, it's forcing us to face some tough questions.
Yeah,
About the future of, global relations.
absolutely. How should other countries react to this potential shift in U.S. foreign policy? I mean, should they try to appease the U.S., or should they be more confrontational? Or maybe they should, look for partnerships with other rising powers like China or India to balance things out. There's no easy answer, but these are the kinds of conversations that need to happen at every level: government, society, everyone.
This deep dive has taken us on quite a ride, hasn't it? From Trump's, surprising statements to Panama's, defiant response, from the history of the canal to the legal and practical hurdles of a potential takeover. We've even explored the psychology, the politics behind it all.
It has been a journey, that's for sure. But like any good deep dive, we end up with, more questions than answers.
Yeah, and before we wrap up, we want to leave you with something to really chew on, something we haven't talked about directly yet, but it's a key part of this whole puzzle.
Yeah, what if we stopped assuming that countries always act out of, pure self-interest? What if there's something else going on? Other motivations?
Okay, now you've got me curious. What other motivations could there be besides the economics, the military strategy, all that?
Well, some analysts are saying that Trump's, his rhetoric, it might be aimed at people in the U.S. Think about it. Taking a tough stance on the world stage, standing up for American interests, even if it ruffles some feathers. That kind of approach, it can really appeal to a certain part of the population.
So you're saying this could be more about, playing to his base, consolidating power here at home, rather than actually trying to, take over the Panama Canal.
It's definitely a possibility. It wouldn't be the first time a leader has used foreign policy for, well, domestic political gain. We've seen it throughout history.
But if that's true, what does it say about, well, about American democracy? And what does it mean for the rest of the world if U.S. foreign policy is driven by, internal political calculations instead of a clear strategic vision?
Those are great questions,
Yeah.
and there are no easy answers. But this whole thing, it really highlights how connected domestic politics and foreign policy are. They're not separate anymore. They influence each other, they shape each other in really complex ways.
Listening to all this, it makes me think that this Panama Canal thing it's a powerful reminder that we're living in a different world now. A world where the old assumptions about power, about influence, even about rationality, they're being challenged.
Absolutely. And it's a reminder that we all have a part to play in shaping the future of global relations.
So to our listener, here's something to think about. As we move forward in this era of shifting landscapes, unpredictable leaders, one thing's for sure, the future isn't set in stone. It's something we create together through our actions, our choices, and our willingness to engage with these complicated issues. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep those conversations going, because the world needs your insights, your perspectives, and your active participation to shape a future that works for everyone. We almost need like a whole new way of looking at things, a new playbook for how countries, deal with each other.
Yeah, the old rules, they don't seem to work the same way anymore.
It's true.
You can't just assume that everything a country does on the world stage is purely rational, like it's all about economic interest or some kind of military strategy. You got to factor in the psychology, the domestic politics, even the personalities of the leaders themselves.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle, but the pieces keep changing shape.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole Panama Canal thing so fascinating, I think. It makes us rethink our whole understanding of how the world works.
So knowing all this, what can our listeners do? How can they make sense of all these global things? And maybe more importantly, how can they get ready for what might be coming next?
That's the big question, isn't it? Well, I think first of all, stay informed. Don't just, read the headlines or listen to sound bites. Dig deeper, explore different viewpoints. Try to understand the forces at play.
Like we always say, right? Knowledge is power.
Right.
And in a world that's changing so quickly, that power, it's more important than ever.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to ask tough questions. Challenge assumptions, even your own. The more we question, the more we learn. And the more we learn, the better equipped we are to handle this world, which is only getting more complex, right?
This deep dive has been, it's been pretty eye-opening, don't you think? We went from this news story about a canal to like this deep exploration of, of global power, the psychology of leaders, even the future of international relations.
It has been quite a journey.
Yeah.
But this is just the beginning, Here's the start of the conversation.
To our listeners, we'll leave you with this one last thought. As we move into this new era, where the world is shifting and leaders are unpredictable, one thing's for sure. The future isn't set in stone. It's something we create together through our actions, the choices we make, and our willingness to really engage with these complex issues. So keep exploring, keep questioning, and please keep talking about these things, because the world, it needs your insights, your perspectives, and your participation to shape a future that works for everyone.